My name is Jeanne Bank, and I'm pleased to be presenting today on behalf of the Technical Committee 314 of the International Standards Organization, ISO. I am one of the Canadian representatives to this technical committee, and I also serve as the secretary to Working Group 3, which deals with caregiver-friendly workplaces. And I'll be providing a little bit more information about that project later in the presentation. I'm also a community and public interest representative on this technical committee, and I would like to recognize Health Canada for their support in helping me to be able to participate in this very important conference. I'd also like to thank the IFA for their technical support in terms of the delivery of this session. The challenges of putting on a hybrid conference with virtual sessions and people in person must be very challenging, and I give them huge kudos for being able to pull this off. In terms of timing, I anticipate the session will run for about 45 minutes. I'm the only speaker, and depending on the questions that you have, we should be finished in about 45 minutes. Today, I'll be introducing the work of the ISO Technical Committee 314 to you and hoping to engage you in some questions and discussion about how standards might be able to contribute to improving the lives of older adults by providing tools and resources that organizations and countries can use in addressing aging issues. Many of you may be familiar with ISO standards, such as standards for quality management, ISO 9000, or ISO 14000 that deals with environmental management standards. But I'm guessing that most of you are not familiar with the fact that ISO develops a lot of standards in the areas of social policy, and in recent years has been increasing its portfolio of standards in areas related to consumer protection, accessibility, and healthcare. The world of standards is a bit murky, and I certainly don't want this to be a lecture about ISO, but I think for background, it's helpful to understand just what ISO is and how standards are developed at ISO. So ISO is an independent, non-governmental international organization with a membership of 166 national standards bodies. Through its members, it brings together experts to share knowledge and to develop voluntary consensus-based standards. The headquarters for ISO is in Geneva, Switzerland. ISO doesn't decide which standards get developed, but responds to requests from any stakeholder that has a request for a standard. Normally, a stakeholder group would go to their national standards body, identify the need for a global standard, and then the request would come to ISO to form a technical committee for the development of that standard. So the standards themselves are developed by groups of experts from all over the world that are part of these larger groups called technical committees. The experts negotiate all the aspects of the standard. They own the standard in terms of its scope, the terms and definitions that are used in the standard, and the actual content and specifications that are in the standard. The technical committees are made up of experts, again, from relevant stakeholder groups such as industry, consumer associations, academia, non-governmental organizations, and government policy makers. So developing standards is a very rigorous, consensus-based approach because comments from all stakeholders are taken into account during the development of the standards. The Aging Societies Committee is a relatively new committee to ISO. It was formed in 2017 after a strategic advisory group provided a report with a number of recommendations on where international standards might be useful and are needed. The British Standards Institute, BSI, is the secretariat for the committee. So when you're looking at innovations and technologies to make products and services a little bit more age inclusive, it's important to be able to share information and to bring together best practices throughout the world. ISO provides a unique platform to be able to do this. We can use the research from experts from all over the world to develop the standards. It's a very collaborative platform. And as I've mentioned before, it provides an opportunity for multi-stakeholder consensus-based standards development. In terms of the benefits that we're looking for to come out of this particular technical committee, certainly the primary beneficiaries will be the end users of products, so older adults and their families. Standards can also increase the confidence of individuals if they know that an internationally accepted standard has been used as the basis for product development or service delivery. So for product manufacturers, it makes sense to follow international standards because the research and development and the specifications for the products are already set. And for service providers, it gives them insight into what the needs of older adults are so that there are not gaps in terms of the products that are on the market. For commercial businesses, following standards puts them in a good position. It allows them to be leading edge and competitive in terms of the services and the products that they're offering. So just as a little bit of summary in terms of the standards business, whether you're a business, an employer, a government agency, a non-governmental organization, using standards gives you a very quick and affordable way to get access to some of the best minds in the world on a particular subject. And plus the standards are maintained. They're required to be updated every 5 years at least, but sometimes more often, depending on the issues that are involved and keeping them up to date with technology. So certainly we know that aging is a cross-cutting subject. And when TC 314 was formed, it was clear that the needs and interests of older adults was already being addressed in a number of other technical committees within ISO, whether that was medical and assistive devices or security and resilience information technology. So the role of TC 314 is not to duplicate that work that's already being done, but to act as a liaison to ensure that age-friendly lens is applied to the other work that's going on within the ISO committees. But it also provides an opportunity for TC 314 to find out if there are any gaps where there might be a need for additional standards. And certainly COVID has highlighted the challenges and needs faced by older persons during this health crisis. As we've experienced in all of our countries, and what we're certainly learning about in this conference, is that older adults are at a higher risk of serious illness and death from COVID. In addition, the pandemic has shone a light on widespread age-based discrimination against older persons, with outcomes ranging from increased isolation to violations to their right to health and life on an equal basis. We believe that international voluntary standards can play a key role in helping to provide solutions to the issues that have been identified during this global crisis. To start off with, I wanted to just quickly go over the work program for TC 314 to give you an idea of what's currently on the map. So our scope is standardization in the field of aging societies. It's a pretty broad topic. We started off with 3 projects. One that dealt with age-inclusive workforces, second one that dealt with care-inclusive organizations, and the third one dealing with dementia-inclusive communities. Those projects are just about complete, and I'll give you an update on what they're all about in a few minutes. We have 2 brand new projects that have been brought to us by Japan. The first one is dealing with well-being in local communities and organizations. And the second one is what we call a technical report. So it will be more sort of a summary of specifications and requirements for accessibility and usability considerations for home-based healthcare products and services and environments. We all know that there are standards that deal with medical devices, but increasingly the home-based healthcare market has a number of products that there are no standards for. So this one will address issues such as accessibility for those products and consumer information to help patients as well as their caregivers in terms of home-based care. So the first project I want to tell you about is the standard dealing with guidelines for an age-inclusive workforce. The convener for this work is Sabrina Pitt. She is with Workwiser International Australia. And the purpose of this standard is to provide organizations with tools to develop, implement, maintain, support an age-inclusive workforce. Provides guidance on how to build opportunities for older workers to be productive, and includes examples of how older persons can obtain work and maintain or expand their current work during a global pandemic. In terms of the status of this particular standard, they've done all the work. The content is complete. They're waiting to get a final draft international ballot out on the standard, and that will be voted on by the full technical committee. Since this standard, the overall aim of it is to encourage employers to have a strong multi-generational workforce and to minimize the risk of age discrimination. Following the guidelines in this standard will help organizations to be more productive and to give them a competitive edge. The new standard will provide guidance to help older workers stay longer in the organization and reduces the risk of knowledge lost and the costs associated with training and recruiting other people to fill their roles. In terms of the content of the standard, it covers a number of subjects, including workforce planning and recruitment, training, health and ergonomic conditions, career knowledge development, transition into retirement, and other opportunities following retirement, such as volunteering. The second one I want to talk about is the standard dealing with a framework for dementia inclusive communities. This project is led by Dr. Thomas Linner, who is with the Technical University of Munich in Germany. And essentially, the standard provides a process-based toolkit for the development, maintenance, and continual improvement of dementia-inclusive communities. We've certainly heard during this conference that dementia is an issue that needs to be addressed globally. Communities are looking for guidance on how to build on their existing structures and networks, enabled and be able to connect with stakeholders in an effort to make their communities more dementia friendly. I was very pleased that this program tomorrow includes a presentation from Hamilton, Ontario, on their efforts to develop a dementia friendly community. The project came out of research in terms of examples of dementia friendly communities and learning from those examples about what works. It's a very comprehensive standard. But any community could pick the standard up and use it as a bit of a roadmap in terms of their journey towards developing a dementia-friendly community. The standard also gives the opportunity for communities to be able to seek recognition for the work that they're doing in this area, because it will be a journey for many communities, and they may start out with a number of projects. I know here in London, Ontario, our Alzheimer's Society has started work on developing a dementia-friendly community, and one of the areas that they're going to focus on is professional services. So, for example, they're starting with dentists, which will be very, very interesting to see how those service providers can adapt their services to meet the needs of persons living with dementia. Just on a personal note, my mother will turn 100 next month, and she is living with dementia. And I can tell you that healthcare appointments are a very significant challenge, not only for her, but for her carers and for the service providers. So anything that could be done to make that process more dementia friendly and less stressful for everyone involved would be a significant improvement. In terms of the content of this standard, it includes general guiding principles, sets of requirements for the design of how you build all those pieces that go together into a dementia-friendly initiative, and guidance on some potential action areas that communities can look to include in their own plan. In terms of the status of this particular project, again, the work has been completed on this over the last couple of years, and the final draft international standard is currently out for voting. So that one should be published probably in early 2022. And the last one that I want to talk to you about is the working group that I'm involved with, Working Group 3. The convener for this project is Professor Alison Williams from McMaster University in Hamilton. And this standard essentially provides a framework and gives guidelines for how organizations can develop and implement policies and programs to support workers who are managing their paid work along with a caring role. This international standard is actually based on a Canadian national standard that was developed and published by CSA Group. So we had a very good foundation to build on. But in taking the standard to the international level, we've been able to benefit from input from people from all over the world in terms of how this standard can help organizations to implement their processes. Now, the key features of this standard is it includes guiding principles and processes in terms of developing a care inclusive program, how to assess your workplace and collect data in terms of the gaps and figuring out which areas to improve. We have a lot of suggestions in terms of best practice, building awareness and a culture for care inclusive programs. One of the unique aspects of this standard is that it includes a sex gender lens to help organizations understand the gendered aspect of caregiving. As we heard this morning at the opening plenary, most carers are women. And we know when we're talking about working carers that these carers are women that are at the peak of their career. And oftentimes they have to take more flexible arrangements in terms of reducing their hours, and also in terms of having to actually leave the workforce to balance because of their caregiving roles. So I think looking at that gendered aspect is quite critical in terms of the workplace. Certainly, there are men who are providing care, but the majority are still currently women. We're pleased to report that the final draft of this standard has been approved 100% by the members of the technical committee, and we anticipate that it will be published next month in December. One of the things that we came across in working on this standard was that we found that terminology related to caregiving varied across the world, and terms that were used in the past are now becoming inappropriate. So we tried, there are no universal accepted definitions when it comes to caregiving. And so what we did was we brought together information from our experts around the world, and we've created an informative guide on terminology related to caregiving to provide some information about the use of these different terms across different regions and some context behind the use of these terms. One of the things that we faced in terms of developing the standard was that in the past, there were many documents that referred to informal carers. And it was interesting, I was at a session that Jeanne Bank gave some months ago, and she said, oh, informal carers, we haven't used that term in Australia for over a decade. And it became clear that while that term might have been used in the past, we know that caring is not informal. It is labor. Requires carers to have training. They are using medical devices. They are using sophisticated medications. There's nothing informal about it. So in our standard, we do not use the term informal carers. We are using the term unpaid carers. But it just shows that language is very important, and it's very important to understand that this language is evolving and trying to keep pace with the developments around terminology is something that we're trying to do in this particular standard. So just to give you an idea of some areas where we're looking at to the future is that we've been asked to look at a number of standards that deal with things such as health promotion, preventative care, and well-being. But it's important to recognize that certainly there are many areas that standards could be developed, but we won't be duplicating work that's taking place. As I mentioned earlier, we develop liaisons and work with other organizations to make sure that we've got proper cross-referencing in the documents in areas such as universal design, accessibility, and technologies and systems for aging societies. We do have a couple of new projects that have been identified. The first one comes from South Korea. And this one basically deals with the response time limit before timeout in automated online services with handheld devices. I think this is a classic example of a standard where if you identify the needs and you respond to the needs of older adults, it would be good for everyone. We also have a suggestion from our colleagues in China to look at the whole digital economy and to try and determine if there is an opportunity and need for a standard to address age-inclusive aspects of the digital economy. APEC held a recent forum on this last month, and we're going to be reviewing the results of that forum to determine if there is an opportunity and an interest in developing a standard at the international level dealing with those aspects. So that's pretty leading edge and would be work that people might be interested in getting involved in. One of the other areas I wanted to mention before I go on is there's been a request from the UK. They've done a lot of research around multi-generational communities, and there's going to be a proposal coming in from the UK for an international standard based on the research that they've done in the UK. And I thought it was interesting at the Age Friendly Summit yesterday that practically every one of the examples and innovative programs that were highlighted included the element of multi-generational activities as part of an age-friendly action area. So I think that that standard would complement very well some of the initiatives within the age-friendly field. We've got a couple of other projects. One is dealing with symbols. Symbols is an area that fits very well within an international standards portfolio. And what we found out in developing the dementia-friendly community standard is that their symbols could really play an important role in helping to facilitate those kinds of programs. We're just looking for a country to come forward to lead that work, but we think that that is a project that could be very helpful. The next one is long-term care. We've certainly, in Canada, this has become very much a major concern. There are two Canadian national standards projects that are being developed around long-term care. HSO, the Health Standards Organization, is developing a quality standard around long-term care that is much needed. CSA Group is also developing a standard on infection prevention and control for long-term care facilities. So both those standards are taking place at a national level, whether there's an opportunity and a need and a feasibility for standards at the international level around long-term care is something that is going to be discussed. We're having a forum at TC 314 in January just to scope out this area to see whether it might work. I think, again, different countries approach long-term care very differently. Some countries look at it very much in terms of the long-term care facility, whereas other countries view long-term care at a much broader scope, everything from home care right through to palliative care. So I think, from an international level, this is something that would really need to be, the scope would need to be defined. We would need to determine if it was feasible to develop these standards and whether there was enough sufficient stakeholder interest to be able to go down that path. As I mentioned at the beginning, stakeholders are the folks that essentially own the standards development process. And when you think about TC 314, the range of stakeholders that could be involved in this work is quite significant. And so we are certainly seeking out stakeholders to get involved in this work. We've been doing a number of webinars. We have a website. And we also have a LinkedIn page, and we've been doing a lot of outreach to identify the work to stakeholders to see if they're interested and see if they would like to get involved. If you're interested in getting involved in this work, you can participate a couple of ways. You can participate within your own national mirror committee, which provides input into the international standards, and you can comment on drafts, and every comment is considered by the international working group in terms of developing the standard. You can also participate as an expert at the international level on any of the working groups. So I would encourage you to contact either your national standards body, or you can contact me directly following this presentation. Our committee manager at the British Standards Institute would be very interested in exploring with you how you might want to be involved in the current projects, as well as some of the new ones that I've identified going forward. Now, this map, nobody at this conference doesn't know about global aging and the different demographic maps for countries. But this map just gives you an idea of the countries where these standards are probably going to be the most applicable in terms of aging populations within those countries. And what I really wanted to show you was, this is a map of the current membership of TC 314. And what we've done here in this map is to show you those countries where 20% of the population will be over the age of 65 by 2050. The countries that are marked either green or orange are currently participating or observing members in TC 314. But as you can see from the map, there are many countries with an aging population that could participate and bring their situations, their best practices, their issues to the table. So we look forward to having more participation on the technical committee, and we would welcome any questions that you have in terms of the work program or the work that's already been developed.